I had just lifted the lid off the slow cooker when my mother-in-law walked into my kitchen and said, "Is that all you're making?" I turned around slowly. The pot was full. I mean completely full. A whole brisket I'd been braising since 6 in the morning. Sitting in a deep red wine broth with carrots and pearl onions and fresh thyme from the little pot I keep on the windowsill. The smell had been filling the house since sunrise. My husband had already wandered in twice just to stand next to it and breathe. "There's also the potato gratin in the oven," I said, "and the green beans with almonds, and I made a peach cobbler for dessert." My mother-in-law looked at the slow cooker again. Then she looked at me. "Brisket," she said, the way someone might say the word disappointing. "My son loves lamb." I knew that. Of course I knew that. But lamb chops for 12 people on a Saturday afternoon when I'd been working 45 hours that week wasn't exactly something I could pull together without some planning. The brisket had been the plan. A good plan. A plan I'd told her about 2 weeks ago when she called to confirm everyone was coming for my husband's birthday. She hadn't objected then. She didn't say anything more about it right away. She just set her purse down on the counter, my counter in my kitchen, and started opening cabinets. "Looking for something?" I asked. "Just seeing what you have," she said. My husband's family arrived in waves over the next hour. His sister showed up first with her kids, who immediately disappeared into the backyard. Then his uncle and his wife. Then his cousin Brent, who always smells faintly of cigarettes and always eats 3 plates of everything, and compliments every single dish like he's been starved for a month. I genuinely love Brent. Then his aunt, who brought a store-bought fruit salad in a plastic tub and set it on the table like it was a contribution. By the time my father-in-law arrived, my mother-in-law had already made 2 comments about the brisket, one to me and one, I later found out, to my sister-in-law. The second one was, "She knows he prefers lamb." I told her months ago. She had not told me months ago. My husband was grilling out back with his dad, completely unaware. I stood at the kitchen counter arranging the green beans and told myself to let it go. It was his birthday. The food was good. The house looked nice. Let it go. I let it go. For about 40 minutes I let it go. Then I heard my mother-in-law in the dining room. And I heard her voice clearly because she wasn't trying to be quiet, telling my sister-in-law that brisket was such a heavy choice, and that she really hoped everyone would have enough room for dessert after eating all that. My sister-in-law said, "I mean, it smells amazing though." My mother-in-law said, "It's not really a celebration meal, is it?" I set down the serving spoon I was holding. I walked to the doorway. I said, "Would you like to see the recipe? I've been making it for 8 years and people tend to like it." She looked at me with that particular expression she has. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown, something in between that somehow manages to communicate both pity and judgment at the same time. "I'm sure it's fine," she said. "Fine." I went back to the kitchen. I checked on the cobbler. I set the table. I called everyone in for dinner. Here is what happened at that dinner. My cousin-in-law Brent ate 2 full portions of brisket and said it was the best thing he'd eaten since his own mother used to make pot roast on Sundays. My father-in-law asked for the recipe. My husband pulled me into a hug at the table in front of everyone and said, "This is incredible. I don't know how you do this." My mother-in-law ate her portion and said nothing. After dinner, while I was clearing plates, she came to stand next to me at the sink. She said, "The cobbler was a little dry." It was not dry. This cobbler was not dry. Brent had thirds. I rinsed a plate. I said, "I'll keep that in mind," she said. "My son's birthday is important. Next year, maybe ask me for help planning the menu." I put the plate in the rack. I turned off the water. I turned around and I looked at her and I said, "Thank you for coming," and I walked back to the dining room. I didn't say anything to my husband that night. He was happy. He was relaxed. He had a good birthday. I folded that feeling of being told my cobbler was dry into a small, tight square in the back of my chest and I put it away. I'm good at that. I've had practice. 4 months later, my husband's parents' 30th wedding anniversary was coming up. His sister, her name is Pam, she lives about 20 minutes from us, called me on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. "So Mom wants to do a big family dinner," Pam said. "And she's thinking she wants to host it at their place. But she also thinks it would be really meaningful if each of us contributed something. Like a real family effort." "Sure," I said. "What does she need?" "She's thinking a main dish and a dessert from each family unit. So from you guys, a main and a dessert." I said okay. I said I'd think about what to bring and let them know. Pam said great, that she was thinking of making her grandmother's lasagna, and that her husband was going to handle dessert, and that it was going to be a really nice night. I spent the next week thinking about what to make. I know how to cook. I genuinely love cooking. It's one of the few things I do where I feel completely in my own head in the best possible way. Just the smells, and the process, and the satisfaction of feeding people something that makes them close their eyes for a second. I decided on a crown roast of pork. It sounds fancier than it is, but it looks spectacular on a table, and it feeds a crowd, and yes, I was aware that it is absolutely a celebration meal and not at all heavy, and very much not brisket. I also decided to make a chocolate layer cake with salted caramel frosting, from scratch.
Which
Takes me about 3 hours, but which I have made probably 15 times and which is, genuinely, the best thing I know how to make. I texted Pam to tell her my plan. She responded with 3 heart emojis and wrote, "Mom is going to love it." The anniversary dinner was on a Saturday. I spent most of Friday cooking. By Friday night, I had the cake done. 3 layers, dark chocolate, the frosting a deep amber color. By Saturday morning, I had the roast prepped and seasoned and in the roasting pan, ready to go into the oven at the right time so it would be perfectly done by 6. My husband helped me load everything into the car. The cake went in a big white box. The roasting pan went in the back, covered tightly in foil, with a bag of supplies, a thermometer, the pan drippings I'd saved for the gravy, fresh herbs for garnish. We drove to his parents' house. I realize now, actually a little proud of what I was bringing. I'd worked hard on it, it was good. My mother-in-law met us at the door. She looked at the pans my husband was carrying. She said, "You made a roast?" "Crown roast of pork," I said. "And a chocolate layer cake." She said, "Oh." She paused. "My sister is bringing a roast. I hadn't known that." "Okay," I said. "There'll be plenty to go around then." She said, "It's just, we'll have 2 roasts. That's a lot of the same thing." I said, "Pork and whatever your sister is making are probably pretty different." She said, "She's making pork tenderloin." I stood on the front porch holding a 3-layer chocolate cake and I took a breath. "I drove an hour," I said, very calmly. "The roast took most of yesterday to prep. The cake took 3 hours." She said, "I just think it might have been nice if you'd checked with me first about what everyone else was bringing." Nobody had asked me to check with anyone. Nobody had given me a list. Pam had told me to bring a main and a dessert, and sent me 3 heart emojis. He was looking at his mother. "Mom," he said. She said, "I'm just saying it's a lot of pork." I said, and I want to be clear that I said this quietly, without raising my voice, without any dramatics. "Okay, then we'll take it home." She looked at me. "What? If it's a problem," I said, "we'll just take it home. You have plenty of food. We'll pick something up on the way and bring that instead. Or we just eat here with what everyone else brought." She said, "I didn't say take it home," I said. "You seem like you don't want it here." "So we'll take it home." My husband said, "Mara." "That's me. My name is Mara." He said, "Let's just go inside." And here is where I made a decision I hadn't entirely planned on making. I looked at my husband, and I thought about the cobbler that wasn't dry, and about the brisket that wasn't a celebration meal, and about standing in my own kitchen while someone opened my cabinets to see what I had, and I said, "No, I'd actually like to take it home." I looked at my mother-in-law. I said, "I worked really hard on both of these, I'm proud of them, and I don't want to leave them here where they're not wanted. So we're going to take them home, and I am happy to come inside and celebrate with you with whatever everyone else brings." She opened her mouth. She closed it. My husband took the roasting pan back to the car. I put the cake box back on the back seat. Then we walked inside, and I hugged my father-in-law, who had no idea what had just happened on the front porch, and I said happy anniversary and meant it. The dinner that night had Pam's lasagna, the tenderloin my husband's aunt had brought, a pasta salad from someone, the store-bought fruit tub that seemed to travel to every event, and rolls. It was fine. It was perfectly fine. My father-in-law, who I've always genuinely liked, kept looking at the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother-in-law was quiet through most of dinner. After the main course, Pam said, "Wait, where's Mara's cake? I thought you were bringing that chocolate cake." My husband looked at me. I said, "We took it home." Pam looked confused. She looked at her mother. Her mother looked at her water glass. My father-in-law said, "Why?" I said. There was some concern about overlap with the other dishes. We didn't want to cause any trouble. The table was very quiet for a moment. Then my father-in-law said slowly, "What chocolate cake?" I said, "I made a 3-layer chocolate cake with salted caramel frosting. It's at home." He looked at his wife for a long moment. She said nothing. He said, "I've been asking you to make me a chocolate cake for our anniversary for 29 years, she said. "Harold." He said, 29 years, Gail." That was the moment I realized I hadn't known my in-laws' first names were Harold and Gail. It felt absurd to be learning this right now. The rest of the anniversary dinner was polite and a little tense, and we left earlier than we probably would have otherwise. My husband was quiet on the drive home. Not angry, just quiet. He does that when he's processing. When we pulled into the driveway, he said, "I should have said something on the porch." I said, "That's not the same thing." I said, "No, it's not. We sat in the car for a minute. Then he said, "The cake is still good, right? The cake is perfect." We went inside. He set the table. I made a pot of coffee. We ate the cake at 10 o'clock at night in our kitchen, just the two of us, and it was genuinely one of the best things I have ever eaten. The caramel frosting had set exactly right. The layers were even. The chocolate was dark and rich, and the salt cut through it perfectly. My husband had 2 pieces. He said, "This should have been on that table." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm going to talk to my mom." I said, "Okay." He did talk to her. It took about a week. I think he needed the time to figure out what he wanted to say and how to say it without it becoming a fight. He's careful like that. Measured. It's one of the things I love about him, even when it means I'm waiting. He called her on a Thursday evening while I was reading in the other room. I could hear his voice but not the words. The call lasted about 40 minutes, which is long for him. When he came in, he sat down on the other end of the couch and rubbed the back of his neck. I closed my book. I waited. He said, "She says she didn't mean for it to come across the way it did." I said, "Okay." He said, "She also says she knows she can be critical sometimes and she's working on it." I said, "Okay." He said, "And she asked me to ask you if you'd make the cake for Christmas." I looked at him. "My dad's been talking about the cake," he said. Apparently she told him about it and now he's like fixated. I thought about Harold, who had been asking for a chocolate cake for 29 years. I thought about the way he'd looked at his wife across that dinner table. I said, "I'll make the cake for Christmas." My husband exhaled. He reached over and took my hand. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't say more on the porch." I said, "I know." He said, "You were right to take it back." I said, "I know that too." He laughed. It was a small laugh, but it was real, and after a week of things being a little careful and a little fragile between us, it felt like something loosening. Christmas was at our house that year. I know, but my father-in-law has bad knees and the drive to their place is long, and it made more sense. My husband handled most of the logistics. I handled the food, because I always handle the food, and I don't actually mind. I made a standing rib roast. I made twice-baked potatoes. I made roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta and a shallot vinaigrette. I made dinner rolls from a recipe I've been using since college that takes 2 days and is absolutely worth it. And I made the cake. Same recipe. 3 layers, dark chocolate, salted caramel frosting. My mother-in-law arrived with a poinsettia and a bottle of wine and handed both to my husband at the door. Then she came to find me in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway. I was checking the roast. She said, "Can I help with anything?" I turned around. I looked at her. She said, "I mean it. I'd like to help." I thought about it for a second. I handed her the bowl of Brussels sprouts. I said, "These need to be trimmed and halved. The cutting board is right there." She washed her hands. She found the cutting board. She started trimming the Brussels sprouts, slowly and carefully, the way someone does when they're trying to do a good job. We didn't talk much while we cooked, but we were in the same kitchen, and she wasn't opening my cabinets, and it was quiet in a different way than it used to be quiet between us. Dinner that year was the best one we'd had with his family. Not because anything was magically resolved. It wasn't. Things with her are still sometimes careful, and sometimes a little hard to read. But she ate the rib roast and said it was wonderful. She had a second roll. She laughed at something Brent said, and I laughed too. And for a moment we were just 2 people at the same table. And when I brought out the cake, my father-in-law made a sound that I can only describe as joyful. He looked at it like it was something he'd been waiting a long time for, which in a way I guess it was. He had 2 pieces. He said it was the best cake he'd ever eaten, which I'm sure isn't true, but the way he said it made me think he believed it, and that was enough. My mother-in-law had 1 piece. She ate it slowly. When she was done, she looked at me and said, "You're a very good cook." It wasn't an apology. I don't think she's built for apologies, not direct ones. But it was the closest thing to one I'd gotten from her in 3 years of marriage, and I decided to take it for what it was. I said, "Thank you." I refilled her coffee. She thanked me. We cleaned up together after dinner, her and me and Pam and my husband, and when everyone finally left, I sat down at the kitchen table with the last of the wine and the quiet of a house that had just been full of people, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not victory, not satisfaction exactly, though there was some of that. I felt like myself. Like I had stayed myself through all of it. Through the porch and the cobbler and the anniversary dinner and the months in between. And that the version of me who loaded that cake back into the car was the same version of me sitting here now. That felt like something worth keeping.